what is in our interest? How is it in the United States' interest to have 94 million desperate people flooding into Europe, flooding into the United States, to have, sort of the terrorist infrastructure that can get established when you fan terrorists all over the world? We've run this experiment before.
Vice President J.D. Vance reckons 90 million freedom-seeking Iranians are desperate terrorists. Amazing. Here is a glimpse of the Iranian people's response following September 11, 2001. Now let's have a look at how the Arab Islamists responded in Judea and Samaria.
There are Palestinian celebrations in the wake of Tuesday's terror attacks in the United States. Apparently, Palestinians took to the street chanting, "God is great." People were throwing candy, distributing candy to passers-by. The U.S. government obviously has become increasingly unpopular, particularly in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, because Palestinians feel that the U.S. government has sided with Israel. One man, Nawal Abdel Fattah, wearing a long black dress, threw sweets in the air saying, actually that's a woman, pardon me, saying she was happy because, quote, America is the head of the snake. America always stands by Israel in its war against us.
Guess who Vance chooses to side with? The latter. But we'll get to that in a minute. No, sir, Iranians will not flood the world following the collapse of the Islamic regime. In fact, the polar opposite will happen. And I'll prove it to you. Prior to the 1979 Islamo-Marxist coup, in the 1970s, around roughly 100,000 Iranians were emigrating around the globe annually, the vast majority of which returned to Iran because they were studying abroad or working as professionals. In fact, the return rate back to Iran before the 79 coup exceeded 90%. Iran was home for Iranians. Now let's compare that to post-1979, shall we? Immediately following the coup, 1979 alone saw an exacerbatory jump from several hundred thousand to almost 1 million Iranians leaving Iran just in 1 year because of the Islamic occupation. This was the first major wave of political exile of many more to come. Comes the 1980s and the 8-year Iran-Iraq war that was propagated not only by Saddam Hussein, but also by Khomeini himself, as well as Western counterparts. Conversely, before 1979, the Shah established a peace treaty with Saddam and the entire region was relatively stable because of the Shah's diplomacy. The 8-year war led to vast numbers of political refugees and immigrants all over the globe, including my own family. Then comes the 1990s and the 2000s. This is where the major uprisings against the Islamic regime started to take hold. Here's where it gets interesting. The aftermath of each mass uprising led to the exodus of millions of Iranians abroad over time. Why? Because following each uprising, the IRGC, reinforced by its foreign Islamist militias being deployed within Iran, predominantly Hezbollah, was only supplemented by Western appeasement to rescue the regime each and every single time without hesitation. One of the largest spikes in the Iranian diaspora population happened after the 2009 Green Movement. Western appeasement led to billions of dollars of investment and deal brokerage with the Islamic regime, bolstering not only the regime's domestic Islamist capabilities, but also its foreign capabilities, particularly in Europe, with the worst of all till date being the JCPOA that enabled vast sanctions relief and unfreezing billions of dollars in assets, only to prop up the regime's regional proxies and terror cells in the West alongside its suppressive apparatus within Iran. And so what happens next? Many Iranians within Iran lose hope because everybody betrays them. Exhibit A, Obama. They foresee no future for themselves under Islamic occupation, and so they fled in the millions. Before 1979, over 90% of Iranian immigrants returned to Iran. After 1979, that figure reversed to become less than 10%, with more than 80% of Iranian immigrants today having fled Iran after 1979. That means the overwhelming majority of global Iranian diaspora was created as a result of the Islamic occupation. Iranians aren't returning to Iran not because Iran is not home, but because Iran is occupied by the same regime that the West themselves continue to bolster, and then complain when the number of political refugees and migrants skyrockets directly because of its existence, starting with the Democrat himself, Jimmy Carter, in 1979. Mind you, for the sake of argument, I haven't even included the exponential rise in emigration from other native Middle Easterners across the entire region as a direct consequence of the persecution and oppression linked to the Islamic regime occupying Iran and its proxies. Today, there's about 8 million in the global Iranian diaspora community, with around 3.1 million having arrived just in 2019, and that figure will only ever so rise so long as the Islamic regime remains in power. Not to mention the national security threats the West faces with growing numbers of Islamist sleeper cells all throughout. Higher energy prices, supply chain delays, coordinated assaults on maritime arteries and global trade market, and the all-round threat to Western civilization. In short, the formula is as follows. The more the Islamic regime occupying Iran remains in power and is constantly appeased to by the West with futile negotiations and deals, the more the West will witness overwhelming numbers of immigrants from Middle Eastern countries and political refugees, majority of whom leave for political reasons, not out of the desire of leaving their ancestral homeland, whether they're an ethnic minority, religious minority, an apostate, or even just for being a woman. The more the likes of Vance deal with Islamists, the more the likes of this will happen. Erfan Esfandiari was hanged just yesterday. He was 18 years old, a kid, hanged for protesting freedom. That's who Vance calls a desperate terrorist. No, toppling the Islamic regime won't flood the United States with 90 million desperate terrorists. It's almost as if many Western pundits are worried that once Iran is free, millions will return. But who are those millions? They've been labelled as the brain drain population who fled Iran, some of the brightest, most intelligent minds who left their own homeland. Among the millions who emigrated from Iran and came to the West were soon to become billionaires, entrepreneurs, academics, STEM associates, medical practitioners, innovators, and artists. These Iranians have created ample wealth and GDP for the corresponding Western nations, particularly in the United States, not to mention their patriotism and respect for the society that they reside in. That is part of Iranian culture and philosophy. It's almost as if these same Western pundits, because of their worry for losing these individuals and their hatred of Israel, will cowardly use any excuse to prevent the Islamic regime from collapse in order to maintain these immigrants' presence. This is why I always say there is a place for everybody from the entire political spectrum when it comes to the liberation of Iran from Islamic occupation. If you're on the right and oppose mass migration, are for stronger borders, and take an ardent stance against political Islam and ideological subversion, great. The toppling of the Islamic regime will not only put a substantial halt to migration from Iran and across the Middle East, but induce a reverse migratory pattern like never seen before. Millions of Iranians in the diaspora are longing to return back home. If you're on the left and stand for indigenous rights against colonialism, great. You would only be logically consistent if you actually stood with Iranians who are indigenous to the land and their struggle against their Islamic colonial occupiers, as well as all other ethnic and religious minorities across the region. That's just about as left as you can get. No? Vance also called the Iranians fighting against the regime beggars. Those same beggars tore up the grains given to them by the IRGC as a subsidy to shut up. And this is in some of the most poorest areas of Iran. Freedom doesn't come at the cost of any grain or dollar, but blood. So that said, let's talk about beggars.
There's a lot of talk about how much is the Israeli government influencing American politics, and there are certainly certain people within the Israeli government who hate the deal.
That's funny. Islamic clerics occupying Iran are the ones claiming that the negotiators themselves are part of the Jewish network. Incredibly consistent, hey? Look, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. Here's the thing with anti-Semites. None of their narratives are actually ever consistent with one another. They just happen to make shit up on the spot. But because the shit that they make up on the spot includes the words Zionist, Israel, or Jews in it, all the retards buy into it because it's attractive. Case in point, JD Vance, an individual who tried to sell $300 billion to the Ayatollah as a bailout to the American public. Apparently loves Pakistan, in bed with Qatar, the headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood Network, Hamas and Palestinian Jihad, and of course, most importantly, his affiliation with none other than Trita Parsi, the leading lobbyist for the Islamic regime in the United States. The same regime that wants you dead. Now that's what I call a fucking beggar. End of the day, Vance, you're just a fat little commie kid who decides to have a sook whenever you can't handle the heat and blame Israel for it. A very common phenomenon. It's best you step aside and let the real men get the job done. You, Vance, are the greatest personification of the woke retard right. Just like your other mate, Qatar Carlson.
And one of the reasons why Iran is example, Iran is a rich country. One of the reasons why Iran is example is because every penny that this regime there gets, be it through sanctions relief or through the oil they're able to get out, they invested in Hezbollah. They invested in Hamas. They spend billions of dollars supporting militias in Iraq, Hezbollah, and Hamas. So that's, they should be spending billions of dollars supporting the people of Iran. They could be spending billions of dollars building a country, but instead they use it on sponsored terrorism. So I think there's a growing awareness of that side of Iran. And I think there's even a growing awareness of that among some of the people in their government. In fact, we have heard that with some of the people in their government. But obviously, there's a tension here, and we'll see how that plays out. I can't tell you how it's going to play out. It's up to them.